Takeru is an ugly, overworked, middle-aged man who hates his boring life. One day, after returning home from his dead-end job, he collapses onto his couch to watch some TV, but all of a sudden, he finds himself teleported to a strange dimension with Discount Hero X sitting across from him. He says he's the one in charge of the solar system. So Takeru asks him if he's an alien, but he says he's actually more like a god, at least as far as Takeru is concerned. Long story short, it's his job to make sure the life on various different planets doesn't go extinct, and he does that by throwing people into new worlds to see what happens. Takeru happens to be the next on the list of people to be sent out, and of course he has the right to refuse, but since he's technically dead right now, his soul will vanish if he doesn't agree to be sent to another world. Takeru doesn't think that's fair at all, and he's right, it's not fair, but there's nothing he can do about it. Kami tells him he doesn't have to worry about it too much since he will be given special powers so he can survive in the new world, but he hasn't really thought about what abilities he should give Takeru, so he takes out a notepad and starts writing down some ideas. Obviously, he would need to be able to use magic, so Kami writes down maxed out mana and asks Takeru if there's anything else he'd want to get. Since Kami is accepting requests, Takeru asks him if he can get a big OP goth girlfriend in the new world. But with how ugly and boring Takeru is, Kami says it won't be easy. Still, he promises to work something out for him once he arrives, and as an added bonus, is granting Takeru an amazing search ability, global language understanding, and several debuff resistances. He's honestly not sure if he's allowed to give people so many op stats in one go, but there's no time to change it now since Takeru's body has already begun to disappear, so he wishes him good luck with his new life. In the next moment, Takeru wakes up lying next to a tree, and he has a good grasp of what happened, but he wonders what he should do now. He decides to just start walking in a random direction in hopes of running into some people, and fortunately, he manages to spot a village close by. Although going there right now wouldn't do him much good since he is 100% broke right now. Just then, he remembers that Kami said he'd be getting a search skill to help him gather material, and that sounds like a good way to earn money, so he holds out his stick and shouts for the search magic to activate, but nothing happens. He then starts freaking out because if he can't figure out how to use his ability, then he's going to starve sooner or later. He starts writing out possible trigger words in the ground, and he eventually comes up with the idea to just say the word search. And that seems to do the trick. Purple icons pop up next to all the harvestable items in the area, and if he says the word scan next to one, it shows a detailed description of what it is. This particular flower happens to be B rank, and he's not sure what that means, but it must be good, so he decides to gather as many plants as he can from this area. After a few minutes of gathering, Takeru has gotten a few pieces of everything this area of the forest has to offer. But most of the plants turn out to be E rank, so he's not sure if doing this was worth the effort. Just then, he notices a pretty rock nearby, and he wonders if it's valuable enough to sell, but when he picks it up, his scan tells him it's just a big piece of anterior poop, which is gross, but the poop is C rank for some reason, so he can't complain. He has gathered up enough resources for the day, so he decides that it's time to head over to the village and see how much money he can get from selling these. By nightfall, Takeru eventually arrives at the village gates where he meets one of the guards, and I can't tell if Takeru is really tall or if the guard is just really short. The guard's name is Marlowe, and he is surprised to hear that Takeru is a gatherer because it's rare to see people like him around here. Marlowe assumes he must be here to sell some materials, so he opens the gate and tells Takeru to head to the village's general store. Takeru eventually arrives at the general store, and there he meets the store owner behind the front desk. He asks the man if he is willing to buy some stuff from him, and as he says this, he pulls the poop rock out of his bag. The owner is amazed when he sees the rock because it's an amazing find, so he offers to pay 5 gold coins for it. Takeru is glad to hear that he can sell the rock, but he's not sure what 5 gold coins are really worth here, so he asks the owner for a little explanation. The owner tells him that if he wanted to stay at an inn, he'd have to pay around 500 raves, and 5 gold coins are worth 5,000 raves total, so this poop rock is actually pretty valuable. The owner asks Takeru if he has any more goods to offer, so he empties his bag, and the owner can't believe all the exotic plants he managed to gather. He asks why Takeru bothered coming to a remote village like this if he had this many valuable items, so he explains that he just picked these up during his journey here. The old man understands, and now that he has an idea of Takeru's skills, he says he has a favorite ask. Takeru didn't come here expecting to receive a side quest, but he says he's willing to help depending on the difficulty of the request. So the owner explains that he wants Takeru to get some mithril ore from the eastern mountains. That sounds like a lot of work, but the owner says he's willing to pay 360 gold coins for it, so Takeru accepts the mission. However, the owner then turns serious and mentions that there are monsters out in those mountains, and hearing that makes Takeru really nervous, so he is going to need to be careful. That night, Takeru rents out a room at the village inn, and he is glad he finally gets a chance to relax. The only thing that'd make this better is if he could get a bath, but he's not sure where to find one. Just then, one of the housekeepers knocks on the door and comes in with a bowl of hot water. Takeru asks her what this is for, so she explains that part of their service is to offer guests bowls of hot water so they can clean themselves, and Takeru's stench practically made her eyes water while he was checking in, so she brought some without him needing to ask for it. Takeru appreciates the gesture, but he says he'd prefer to have a proper bath instead. However, the girl looks at him in confusion because only nobles and rich people can afford to have baths, and Takeru has "Brokey" written all over his face. He falls to his knees at the realization that he won't be able to take baths normally in this world, and the girl can see that he's really upset about not getting a bath, so she tells him that there are some wizards who are able to use spells to clean others, so maybe he could try that instead. After hearing her mention wizards, Takeru remembers that Kami gave him the ability to use magic, so he should be able to use a cleaning spell. He's really grateful for the girl's insight, so he gives her a huge tip as thanks and sends her on her way. Once she's gone, he attempts to use cleaning magic by yelling out the word "clean," and it works on the first try. However, feeling the magic rub all over his body causes him to make some weird noises, so the girl probably thinks he's a weirdo now. On the bright side, the clean spell seems to be really effective, so Takeru isn't going to have to worry about smelling funky all the time, but he still wishes he could enjoy a proper bath. The next day, Takeru heads out to gather a few more items to sell when he notices a new symbol from his search skill. Each symbol represents a particular kind of loot, so he wonders what it might be. But to his utter horror, when he takes a look, he finds a decomposing skeleton on the ground. His scan tells him that this poor guy is named Belria, and he must have died fighting out here a while ago. He goes closer to inspect the corpse, and that's when he finds a locket with a note on it. The note was from Belria's little sister, and she was basically thanking him for working so hard to earn money to treat their father's illness, but more than anything, she just wanted her brother to make it home safely, so she asked him not to do anything too dangerous. But he clearly didn't listen to her advice. Takeru spends the next hour holding a burial for Belria, and once that's done, he draws a circle and casts a barrier so he can set up camp. The next morning, Takeru heads further into the forest until he arrives at the Forest of White Trees. This place is supposedly full of monsters and creepy as hell, so Takeru would have loved to avoid this place altogether, but it's the only way for him to get to the Eastern Mountain. He casts a light spell so he can see well enough to scan the area, but he doesn't spot anything of high value. Even weirder is the fact that he doesn't see any monsters around here, even though this place is supposed to be crawling with them. He doesn't question it too much and decides to take advantage of the strange absence of monsters to breeze his way through the forest. However, as he was running, he ended up falling straight off the edge of a cliff. There's no way he'd survive a drop like this, so he desperately starts calling out spell words in an attempt to save himself, and fortunately, when he says the word "fly," a floating spell activates, allowing him to land safely. He's now stuck at the bottom of a cavern, but he notices a ton of ores in the nearby walls, so he decides to make the most of it and starts mining them out. He finds a lot of valuable ores like silver, but there's still no sign of any mithril, so he decides to head deeper into the caves. After walking for a bit, his search skill alerts him to an ore deep in some rocks, but before Takeru could head over, he feels the entire cave system begin to shake, so he's going to need to be careful. He uses a controlled fire blast to break through the rock, and as luck would have it, he manages to find some mithril ore, but it's not much. The cave system suddenly begins shaking again, so Takeru is starting to worry that the roof might collapse. The smart thing to do right now would be to head home for the day and come back when you know it's safe, but just like a fanatic cage diver, he decides to keep going deeper anyway. He eventually comes across an opening which leads him to a beautiful aquifer, and he is really excited because the water looks so dazzling. He uses his ability to scan it, and to his surprise, he discovered that this is S-rank ancient dragon magical water. This is the most valuable thing he has ever found, but that ancient dragon part does concern him a little since he wouldn't want to have to deal with one of those. Just then, as Takeru dips his hands in the water, something huge emerges from the water, and a moment later, Takeru is face to face with the ancient dragon. The dragon yells at him for daring to intrude upon its lair, and it is letting off a deadly pressure to intimidate Takeru, but he doesn't actually notice anything wrong. Takeru realizes this is his fault for intruding on the dragon's home, so he sincerely apologizes for his mistake, but this catches the dragon off guard since it has never seen someone remain so calm in its presence before. It takes a liking to Takeru and asks him if he's really a human because he has an unnaturally high amount of mana. It says Takeru's mana pool might even be greater than its own, but Takeru has no idea what it's talking about. The dragon's name is Voldius, and he has a favorite ask now that he knows Takeru has such an expansive mana pool. Basically, it wants Takeru to hatch its egg since it doesn't have enough mana to do it, and as a reward, it will give him a large cluster of mithril ore. Takeru thinks that sounds easy enough to do, so he takes the egg and starts channeling mana into it. But halfway through, the egg suddenly starts draining all his mana until he eventually loses consciousness. By the time he wakes up, he finds a little baby dragon sitting in front of him, so he realizes the hatching was a success. Voldius is glad to see his child has finally been born, but he then proceeds to ask Takeru to take it with him on his journey. Takeru asks if he's sure about this since he thought Voldius would want to spend time with his kid, but Voldius says Takeru is far stronger than him, so his child would be better off with him. And now that Voldius has some milk to buy at the bottom of his lake, so he submerges himself and leaves Takeru to take care of Bee. Takeru and Bee eventually make it out of the cave, but it's almost dark out and it'll be difficult for them to travel through the forest once it's nighttime. He decides that the best course of action is to hunker down for the night and continue traveling tomorrow, so he tells Bee to get ready to set up camp. First, he reaches into his storage bag and fetches some of the magic water that he got from the cave for Bee. The magic water is apparently essential for the growth of a young dragon, so it's a good thing he got so much of it. After Bee is done with her first cup, she asks Takeru for some more, but when he brings another cup of water, instead of taking it, she pushes it towards Takeru, encouraging him to drink it instead. Takeru isn't particularly thrilled by the idea of drinking water a dragon has been skinny dipping in for centuries, but he doesn't want to say no to Bee, so he downs the glass, and it actually doesn't taste that bad. It's now time for Takeru to set up camp, so he sets down a few magic stones to create a protective barrier. Technically, in this world, magic stones are supposed to be an insanely valuable commodity, but he's able to casually make them by just thinking about a spell really hard and pouring magic into his hand. This one, for instance, is a heating magic stone, and Takeru plans to use it to prepare tonight's dinner, so he sets it up in the fireplace and starts cooking. He's making some grilled steak and meat stew to go alongside it. This has always been his favorite dish, and it looks like Bee wants to have a taste as well because she's practically drooling all over herself at this point. Takeru isn't sure if it's alright for a baby dragon to eat real food when it was born like 2 hours ago, but he gives her a bowl anyway, and Bee promptly burns her lips because she had no idea the soup was so hot. Takeru blows on it a little to help cool it down and hands it back to Bee so she can give it a proper taste, and she absolutely loves the stew. Takeru is glad to see that Bee liked his cooking so much, but he wonders how she feels about having to leave Voldius behind. Bee stares at Takeru with a confused expression on her face because why would she miss Voldius when she's got Takeru right here? While Bee is hugging him, he uses his appraisal skill on her, and he is surprised to see that Bee is already B rank even though she's still so little and cute. She also has a bunch of strong-sounding gifts like Limitless Evolution, so she's bound to become stronger than him eventually, but he wants to make it clear that she's absolutely forbidden from doing anything that'd be too reckless. Which is good advice in principle, but Bee wasn't listening at all. The next morning, Takeru climbs back up the cliff, and when he gets to the top, he's surprised to see that the forest seems totally normal now. He wonders what could have caused such a drastic change overnight, but it's not his job to figure things like this out, so he decides to just let it go. Since he's here anyway, he figures he might as well do some gathering, so he uses his search ability to scan for any C-rank ingredients nearby, but just as he's about to start picking them up, Bee comes flying over to him in a panic because there's something scary in the forest. Takeru switches the target of his scan to any hostile monsters in the area, and sure enough, he locates half a dozen hostiles closing in on them. He may not enjoy fighting, but he's more than capable of dealing with a few monsters on his own. All of a sudden, a rock griffin appears behind him, but compared to Voldius, this barely seems like an inconvenience, and if anything, he can't wait to taste the bird's juicy meat once he kills it. He casts his shield to protect himself and then conjures up 3 ice needles before shooting them at the monster and taking it down in one fell swoop. He then turns to face the horde of wolves that's closing in on him and to deal with them. He casts some enhancement magic on himself to boost his movement speed and jumps into the air to evade the wolves' initial attack. He then casts hardening on his hands and feet and caves one skull in on his way down with an axe kick. Afterwards, he takes the remaining wolves out one after another, and by the time he's done, he's got a lot of meat to collect for his next meal. He's happy with the haul he got from that battle, but when he looks up, he realizes there are still a ton of monsters out there, and if he tries fighting them all, he's going to be stuck in this forest for weeks. He wishes there was a way he could just avoid dealing with them altogether. And as he says this, Bee grabs onto the back of his jacket and starts trying to pull him into the air. Takeru wasn't expecting this to work since Bee is so much smaller than him. But as it turns out, she's actually pretty strong, so she manages to lift him into the air. However, at this rate, it'll take them 4 to 5 business days to get out of this forest. So Takeru decides to help out by casting weight reduction magic on himself. The second he does that, he and Bee shoot straight into the air, but Bee isn't exactly a trustworthy pilot. So midway through the flight, she accidentally lets go of Tegru, and he is sent hurtling straight for the ground. Somehow, he managed to survive that devastating fall, and on the bright side, he managed to make it out of the white forest in a matter of minutes, so the mild hip fracture was definitely worth it. They are pretty close to the village, but Tegru doesn't want to risk flying on B, so he decides to just walk instead. Along the way, B starts pointing towards the stick in Tegru's hand, asking what it is. He tells her that it's apparently a branch of the Yggdrasil tree, and it was just sitting in the bag that God gave him, so he decides to just take it out and point it at stuff to see what happens. B seems to understand something about the stick, so she breathes out a cloud of magic onto it, awakening the stick's true form. Tegru has no idea how or why that worked, but before he can figure it out, he suddenly hears a loud growling noise coming from the forest, so he immediately gets himself ready for a fight. Just then, B flies off into the forest by herself, so Tegru is forced to chase after her until they eventually find an elf girl propped up against a tree. Tegru rushes over to aid her since he's worried that she might have been injured by a monster, but the girl tells him she's not hurt, she's just really hungry. She hasn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days now, and she's on the verge of starving to death, so she begs Tegru to spare her some rations. He can't just leave her like this, so he reaches into his bag and gives her some water, as well as the lunch he packed for himself earlier. The girl's eyes light up the second she sees the food, and she wastes no time scarfing it all down in a matter of seconds. But now that she's no longer starving, Tegru has a few questions for her. For one, he wonders how the hell she has been starving out here for 3 days when the nearest town is barely a day's walk away. The girl admits that she was in a hurry and got lost on her way out here. But even so, it's common sense to carry at least a few days' worth of rations with you at all times, yet she literally brought nothing. The girl is a little embarrassed and tries thinking of a good excuse, but she gets way too close to Tegru in the process, and once he catches a whiff of her, he realizes she stinks. The girl tries to defend herself by telling him it's not her fault since she had to camp out here for days on end with no supplies, but that doesn't change the fact that she smells like manure right now. The girl gets up and tells Tegru that while she is thankful for him saving her, she thinks it was incredibly rude for him to say that she stinks, even if it was true. She then runs off to continue her journey, but she didn't ask for any directions and she still has no supplies, so he doesn't think she's going to make it very far. But that's not his problem to deal with, so he continues heading back to the city with B. They eventually make it out of the forest, and along the road, B notices a carriage approaching, so he stops to talk to the driver. The man notices his staff and asks Tegru if he is a sorcerer, but while he could definitely be one if he wanted to, Tegru wants to stick to peaceful jobs, so he tells the man he's just a gatherer who happens to have a staff. The man then asks him what he's doing all the way out here, so Tegru explains that he is heading towards Hormy village. The man is surprised to hear that he's heading there on foot since it's quite a long journey, but it's not like he had much of a choice. The driver offers to give him a ride back to the village if he would like, and Tegru appreciates the gesture, but he's pretty big, so he is worried that he might take up too much space in the carriage. But both the man and his family already aboard tell him there's nothing to worry about, so he goes around back and climbs in. Something Tegru notices recently is that ever since he came to this world, children seem to just naturally like him. He's not sure why, but it makes things easier for him since if the kids like him, then most adults will be nice to him as well. He thanks them once again for giving him a ride, but they say it's not a big deal since everyone in Tormy helps each other out whenever they are in trouble. Tegru appreciates their generosity, but he thinks they are being a little too trusting since he could have been a bandit for all they knew. However, they tell him they knew he was not a bandit because if he were a bad person, then this bell would have rung and they never would have offered him a ride. Tegru is amazed that bells can be enchanted with magic stones to detect whether someone is bad or not, and he wonders if he can make something like that for himself later. Just then, Yunin notices a strange sound coming from Tegru's jacket, so she asks him what it is, and he is forced to explain that he actually brought a rare monster with him. He was expecting the family to freak out a little at the mention of a monster, but they tell him that it's actually perfectly normal for adventurers to keep monsters as pets from time to time, so it doesn't bother them. In that case, there's no reason for Tegru to hide B any longer, so he tells her she can come out, but she had better not bite anyone. Once the kids see B, they are both overwhelmed by how cute she is, but Eliza and Palom are both more impressed by the fact that Tegru managed to tame a dragon cub. They ask him if he happens to be the Dragon Knight, but he says he just happened to find and hatch a dragon while he was out on a mission. Once it's time to take a break for the night, Tegru sets up his barrier and he assures the family that as long as the barrier remains up, no monsters will come anywhere near them. And even if something does try to attack them, B will be here to alert them before it gets too close. They are all glad to know that they are safe for the night, but they still need to do something about their dinner, so Eliza gets ready to start cooking. But before she does, Tegru asks her if she'd be willing to let him handle the meal prep for today. He reaches into his bag and pulls out all his pans, which amazes the kids since there's no way all that stuff should be able to fit in such a small sack. Takeru explains that his bag operates like an item box, so there's a lot more space on the inside than it seems, and it's really handy for gathering things. Once Takeru is done cooking, everyone digs in and they are all delighted by how delicious his food is, especially Paulum since he was sick of having to eat dried meat all the time. As the night drags on, they all begin to sing songs and dance to pass the time, and the kids even invite Takeru to join in. He never got to experience anything like this when he was back on Earth, since he'd always just spend the night alone in front of his TV, but eating with others is a lot more fun than he thought it would be. The next morning, Takeru wakes up and begins working on cleaning his scissors to keep himself busy until it's time to get back on the road. Poland tells him they can head out after they've had breakfast, but Takeru actually has a small favor he'd like to ask. He has never tried driving a carriage before, so he asks Poland to let him try, and he sees no issue with it. So he lets Takeru take the reins, and before long they arrive at the village. Takeru gets off the carriage and Poland thanks him for sharing his food, but Takeru says he should be the one thanking them since he didn't have to walk all the way back on his own. Poland and the others drive off afterwards, and as the short guard watches them leave, he says it must finally be spring. Takeru doesn't know what that's supposed to mean, so he asks the guard for an explanation, and he is informed that Poland does weaving for a living. He frequently travels to warmer regions for work, and the journey is always difficult for him and his family. Unable to hunt, they're left to survive on meager rations. That explains why he was so happy to taste Takeru's food, and learning how bad Poland has it makes Takeru realize how lucky he is to have an ability that allows him to gather materials. A little while later, Takeru heads back to Jerome's store to deliver the materials that he was asked to gather, and as a little test, Takeru slips one magic mithril ore he got from the dragon's den in with the regular mithril to see if Jerome is the kind of person to scam him. Jerome spends a long time examining the rocks, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that this one in particular must be a piece of magic mithril ore. He tells Takeru that a few of these contain enough magic to replace most of the magic stones in the kingdom, and Takeru feigns surprise even though he already knew that. Jerome tells him it's amazing that he was able to find something this valuable, but Takeru tries to downplay the achievement and says he just happened to come across it on his trip. Even if Takeru claims to have found it lying at his feet, Jerome says it still takes considerable skill to be able to find things like this, so he tells Takeru that he would be better off heading to the city of Belkame. It's much larger than this village, and as much as Jerome doesn't like the idea of letting talent like Takeru leave, he will be able to find a larger variety of items to buy and sell compared to what he would get here. He just asks that when Takeru eventually makes a name for himself, he send a few extra customers Jerome's way. Takeru doesn't actually intend on becoming famous or anything, but the idea of heading to the big city does intrigue him, so he decides to read about it once he gets back to the inn. There, he finds out that Belkame has an adventurers guild that brokers requests all across the country. The adventurers themselves are divided into combat, support, and various other roles, and since Takeru is in another world, he wants to try out adventuring and traveling the world for a while. He decides that he is going to go join the guild in Belkame, but before that, there are still a few things he needs to do in Tormy. He heads into town and first finds someone to process all the monsters he caught. And while he's waiting for that to be done, he spends the night partying with the villagers and enjoying a feast. The next morning, Takeru heads back to the butcher, and now that all of the monster parts have been processed, he has enough food and seasoning stock to last for the duration of his journey. The woman tells him it's going to be lonely around here without Takeru around, and a lot of the other villagers have been saying they want him to stay a little longer as well. Takeru says he will miss this place as well, but there are a lot of exciting places out there for him to visit and new people for him to meet, so he can't settle down here. The woman understands, so she says she won't push the matter any further, but before Takeru leaves, she wants to give him something extra. She hands him a bag and says she packed him a travel lunch. Actually, she packed him a ton of travel lunches, so it looks like Takeru isn't going to have to worry about food for a while. After that, he heads back to his room, and the only thing left to do is figure out what to use the magic mithril ore for. Jerome told him he couldn't afford to buy it, so Takeru has no idea what he's supposed to do with it now. It's too valuable for him to just toss out, but since it supposedly has a ton of magical energy inside it, Takeru wonders if he can use it to create something useful for the villagers since they've been so nice to him. Just then he notices his lamp on the table, and it gives him an idea, so he takes the magic stone and tries combining it with the lantern. It doesn't take long for him to figure out how to do it, and after a large flash, a magic item was created. The next morning, as Takeru was about to depart, the entire village came out to say goodbye to him. Takeru thanks them for everything they've done for him, and as his way of showing his appreciation, he made this for them. He tells everyone that it's a magic item that will create a barrier around the village to keep out any people with malicious intent, and while they are all grateful for his kindness, They wonder if it's really okay for them to take something so valuable. Takaru tells them it's fine since it's the least he can do to repay them. Plus, he wanted to make sure the village would still be in one piece in case he comes back to visit. Jerome is a little curious about what's powering the device, so he takes a look inside and sure enough, he finds the magic stone, which is worth a small fortune. He's about to say that they really can't accept a gift that's so expensive, but Takaru already ran out of the gate while he was talking, so there's no way he can return it now. While Takaru is walking on his way to Belkame, he takes a moment to enjoy the peaceful scenery. However, that peace doesn't last long because he soon encounters a random giant crab in the middle of the road. After the initial shock wears off, Takaru takes a look at the crab's stat and everything is pretty unremarkable. But as soon as Takaru sees that the crab is edible, he decides that he and B will be having seafood for dinner today. Takaru casts enhancement magic on himself in preparation for the fight. Before he could actually do anything, B suddenly flies ahead and hits the crab with a sonic scream that knocks it out cold. Takaru is impressed since he had no idea that B could do something like that, but the battle isn't over yet because two more crabs suddenly show up. Takaru thinks he's safe in the middle of the road since crabs can only move sideways, but he was horribly wrong since these crabs are able to move forward really fast. They both have him surrounded, so Takaru is about to be smushed, but before the crabs close in, B pulls Takaru into the air, causing them to smash into one another instead. Takaru thanks B for her quick thinking, but the fight still isn't over yet because the first crab just regained consciousness, and it mindlessly charges at Takaru, so he summons his staff and smacks the crab straight into the air, finally killing it. Now that all the crabs have been defeated, it's time for Takaru to start preparing them. So first, he uses hardening on his arm to turn it into a makeshift knife, and then he gets to work cutting off all the claws and legs. A few minutes later, he has prepared all the limbs for boiling, so he pulls out a giant pot and puts them all in. Don't ask where he got the giant pot though. He adds water and a bunch of salt, and after boiling for a few hours, the crab meat is finally ready, so he and B dig in. They both absolutely love the flavor of the crab meat, so from now on, Takaru plans to take down and eat as many monsters as possible so he can try all sorts of delicious meals. A few days later, Takaru and B arrive at the gates of the city of Belkame, and he is amazed by how magnificent the fortress walls are. He notices that there's a long line at the gate where inspections are being done, so he walks over to join the queue. But before it gets to his turn, he decides to disguise his magic bag since it would be bad if the guards found out he has infinite storage. Once it's Takaru's turn, he gets called into a separate room to meet with the guards, and while one goes through his belongings, the other asks him what business he has in Belkame. Takaru explains that he came here because he's interested in signing up at the Adventurers Guild, and the male guard can understand why since Belkame has the largest guild on the continent. He doesn't think Takaru is suspicious, but he still needs to do his job, so he tells him he's going to check him with avarice. Takaru has never heard of this avarice before, so he asks the guard what it does, and he explains that it basically lets them check if a person is suspicious or not. Takaru doesn't mind since it's either this or a full cavity search, so the guard uses the device to scan him, and after a few seconds, he says there's nothing out of the ordinary. Takaru is kind of curious about what the guard saw, so he uses his ability to scan the magic device, and he sees the stat window which showed the guard. It basically just says Takaru can use magic, and he's relieved that the laundry list of abilities that the god gave him don't show up on normal scans. The guards tell him he's good to go, but he does have one more question before Takaru leaves. It's not a big deal, but he's wondering why Takaru has the blessing of the dragons on his stat screen. Takaru explains that it's probably because of his pet, so he tells B to come out, and both guards are in awe of how cute she is. There are no rules against having pet dragons here, so Takaru is allowed to take B inside, but the guard tells him he's going to have to put some sort of tag on B as proof of ownership in case anything happens in the city. Takaru isn't sure what to use since he didn't bring a collar with him, but then he remembers that Poland's kids gave him a lucky charm a few days ago, so he takes it out of his bag and slides it onto B's tail. The guard says that's good enough, so now all that's left is to file a report telling the mayor that a dragon has entered the city, but Takaru doesn't have to worry about that. They return his bag and tell him that if he wants to get to the Adventurers Guild, then he can get there by going straight along the main road. As Takaru takes his first steps into the city, it is even more amazing than he thought it would be. Just then, B points to a big building at the end of the street, and that must be the Adventurers Guild, so he heads inside and takes a look around. A few moments later, a woman named Europa approaches Takaru, and she welcomes him to the Adventurers Guild. They are always happy to get new registrations, so she leads him over to the reception desk where Takaru is introduced to the receptionist Ariana. She asks him to fill out his name and current job on the form, and that sounds simple enough, but now that Takaru thinks about it, he doesn't know why he is able to understand this world's language at all. After filling out the form, Ariana asks Takaru if he has any combat experience, and Takaru informs her that he has taken out a griffin, a bunch of wolves, and a couple of crabs as well. That all sounds very impressive, but Ariana kind of thinks Takaru is making it up, so she asks if he has any proof of his kills. He says he does have proof, but it's pretty big, so he asks her if it's really alright for him to bring it out right here. Ariana doesn't think it will be that bad, so she tells Takaru to go ahead, but to her shock, he pulls out a giant crab and drops it right on her desk. The weight of the crab crushes Ariana's desk instantly, and Takaru realizes he may have messed up, but in his defense, he did warn her that it would be big. All the guild patrons gather around to see what all the commotion is about, and the guildmaster asks what's going on. Takaru says he just wanted to show Ariana his crab, and the guildmaster can see that, but he gets suspicious of the fact that Takaru has an item box, so he asks him where he got it. Takaru says he got it as a gift, and after using his ability, the guildmaster confirms that Takaru is telling the truth. The guildmaster has a scan ability similar to Takaru's, but instead of a stat screen, he just sees an aura around a person that tells him whether they have good or bad intentions, and Takaru seems fine, so there's no need to punish him for a simple mistake. He says they can appraise the crab and issue payment by the end of the day, but Takaru says he actually plans to eat the crab later, which shocks everyone in the guild. The crowd is starting to get even bigger, so Ariana says she will finish Takaru's registration in the room next door. Once she's at a new desk, she tells him that the crab definitely proved that he is a capable fighter, so she finishes up his registration and slides a guild armband over to him. She knows he deserves a higher rank, but according to the guild rules, all new members have to start at F rank. However, with his skills, he should be able to rank up in no time. This was the end of episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part.